Thank you very much. So for those who don't know me, I've been with the Linux Foundation for 10 years, and for 30 years before that, I was in embedded. So my background is embedded and enablement of hardware. And one of the things that we've been looking at the Linux Foundation is how do we actually, position some of these projects. And let me start into this. I'll say that I like questions. I welcome them. And anyone who asks a question can get a Zephyr kite if they want. Okay? So let me start. Sustainable development, to me, is you meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability to meet the future. Okay? That's pretty much the definition I'm working with for this project. And the UN Sustainability Goals is a framework. We've been looking around and looking at our open source projects to see how they all fit into this context. And we need the goals that are there, the 17 goals, were actually a very useful framework for us to do the analysis from. And they're trying to achieve by 2030. Now, I think we're not going to get there. On the other hand, every step we take gets us closer over time. And so let me start going through this. So these are the goals, okay? No poverty, no hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work, innovation, reducing the inequalities, sustainable cities, responsible consumption, climate action, life below water, life on land, peace, justice, and strong institutions, and various partnerships. So those are the goals that they've been trying to work towards. And we've been sort of lucky in that open source has had a key role in achieving a lot of these goals, or working towards them, because it's a share, right? They've recognized that the digital public goods, which is the open source technology and community projects, are helping to solve these challenges. And so that's pretty much what I'm going to be talking about today. It's going about that. And public good spectrum, open source is obviously one of the ones I've focused on, but obviously open hardware, which is very much heart of this community. Making things open, making open standards, making things available so we can share and reuse really does give us a way of building up on top of what other people work on and being very efficient. So the Linux kernel itself is a neutral foundation. It's a nonprofit. And we've been around now since about 25 years. And there's over 1,000 projects at the LF right now. So we have a lot of code bases we look at and nurture and support. And we wanted to make sure we could create some awareness for those 2030 goals. Open source, though, is pretty much everywhere. This first one here, I don't know if the pointer works or not, but let's see. Yeah, it does. This one here, Black Duck just released that report. Basically, if you look at the details here, Black Duck is a source code scanning company, and they sort of do a lot of scanning of repositories for this commercial service. And then every year they look at their data and see what they're seeing. And 97% of the code bases that they scanned had some open source in them. And of that scanned code, 70% was open source. So open source is very pervasive, even if you don't know it, okay, in a lot of the spaces. Similarly, Sonotype also does this scanning. They're another scanning company. They also have gone and looked at the things. And they look at all the number of packages. And these are open source packages in various repos. And they're looking at Maven, NPM, NuGet, PyPy, Go. And they're looking at the size of these things. And you're starting to see things like with more than 400 packages into an app because of all the dependencies and dependency chains. So it becomes a really interesting ecosystem where there's potential for vulnerabilities and things like that, but open source is there, and that's how you get to the stage where 70% of your application may be open source when you look at it. I was looking at Honda's infotainment vehicle system, and they were transparent about the fact that 59% of their IVI system is actually open source, and they just customize on top of that, which sort of lines up with that stat. So the Linux Foundation was started to host the Linux kernel. And it has actually been one of the most successful open source projects out there. It has a velocity of about 9 commits per hour, and a bug fix velocity of 1 commit per hour. So there's a lot of change that's going in. A lot of it's in the drivers, and a lot of it's in the subsystems and specific hardware and enablement. There's a lot of things that are working towards making things efficient, and to change things in there takes a lot of effort sometimes. The first project they tapped me at when I hit the Linux Foundation was to work with the Preempt RT community to get the Preempt RT patches upstream. Well, the only way we could do that was, quite frankly, by increasing the quality of the wider set of the Linux kernel. And that took 8 years. So change to happen in a quality fashion does not happen quickly, especially when so many people are depending on it and using it. And right now, 90% of the world's public clouds are using it, and over 60% of embedded is using Linux. So it's there and it's pervasive. And you're seeing it in the energy sectors, you're seeing it in networking, you're seeing it in cloud technologies, you're seeing it in AI. So it becomes a pre-competitive platform that supports cooperation and sustainable development because it's there. Now, the Linux Foundation itself has a variety of other foundations in it now. Obvious things like LF Energy are there, and then Green Software Foundation and OS Climate, and then the agricultural stacks, which are where people are collaborating together to use things to be more efficient and also to work towards some of these goals. So you can sort of look by the names and know that these things are sustainable. But we weren't sure, what about the rest of the projects? How do they comply? So from the LF Energy ones, you can sort of see things like, say, the firmware stack for EV charging. Yeah, that's obviously sustainable. That's going to help the sustainability story. The GISA is for the edge, for the smart metering at the edge of the grid. These are open projects. Anyone can participate, and you don't need to be a member to participate in any of the LF projects. These are always open and available. But the rest of the LF projects, we were trying to figure out, okay, how do we do the mapping to the UN goals? And because we did about this research mostly about 2 years ago now, and there's been more projects that have been added to the LF since then. GISA, for instance, was not there when we were doing that first set of research. But the questions we were looking at was, does the open source assets help users make progress? And does the project itself help address the goals? That was the research that was going on there. And if you want, this report is out there. It summarizes what they found out from that analysis and that research. And so what we're looking at here is how do we get that? And you know, cloud native was the biggest one there, but you can kind of see here, embedded's a lot. And then there's things like the LF Edge and the LF Energy sitting there and so forth. And so things like the CHIPS Alliance for the hardware side and Java and so forth. So we have a lot of spectrum here. And pretty much all of them contribute to Goal 9, which is innovation and infrastructure, because we're looking at open source is a high percentage of any stack in the industry, and it's in common, it's shared, and it's non-differentiated. And this software is created once that everyone uses. That is helping sustainability. But it's not just there, it's things like, you know, field boundary data sets, modeling, climate data from the OS climate stuff, basically on the Hyperledger Fabric, looking at tracking water, and then some of the open color stuff from Smart Parks. These are all projects that help towards the goals, even though you may not at first glance think about them as goals for this, because they're being used. And so one of the surprises for me when we did this research was when, after we talked to the analysis and so forth, is Zephyr is showing up a lot in some of these projects. And so that's my background here. And so most of what I'm going to talk about is some of the things I've been finding from Zephyr to share with them with you. So hands up, who has not heard of Zephyr? Okay, we've got a few. So it's an RTOS. It started in 2015 and then became public and launched in 2016. It actually derived from a code base that was used in satellites. Okay, Wind River had acquired a company, and then when Intel had acquired Wind River at the time, they needed a neutral code base, so they started with this RTOS. And we did a lot of surveys and studying to figure out, well, what do people really want an RTOS to do? And the underlying themes became pretty clearly we wanted to be able to go after security and safety. And so right from the start, we were following security best practices, and we're finally at the stage where we can go after formal safety certifications, or at least we've got a path for it now, finally. And so we've been working on improving the quality and doing this pretty much all the way. But there's always been a bunch of sensors and boards, and to put into context with the Linux kernel, we're now at about 3 commits an hour, okay? So think about that. We've had over, we're just about to come up with another release, and when we checked last week, there have been over 700 contributors into that release. So for an embedded project, I've never been on an embedded project other than Linux where we've got that type of velocity. It's under neutral governance in the Linux Foundation, so no one company is dominating it, and that was something we very much strive towards. It's permissively licensed, so you don't have to tell me you're using it. You've got the terms in the licensing that you have to follow, but finding out where Zephyr is being used has been definitely a challenge for me, okay? And it's very modular, so anyone who's familiar with embedded Linux and using device tree, it's very familiar to you, because we're using device tree here. And it is, we actually do follow what the kernel does. We have an LTS, so every 2 years, we put out an LTS, and that's being supported. Initially, it was just 2.5 years, but just this year, we've moved it up to 5 because of the CRA. So the community agreed to basically support security fixes into the LTSs for 5 years now. And we are going after certifications, and if you want to talk to me more about that after, I'm happy to talk about what we're doing with 61508 and 26262, which is the first targets. So we're open source, and to put us in context here, CNCF has been going after, Kubernetes has been going after Linux, okay? And so they measure this. This isn't a Zephyr measurement, okay? And these are the top open source projects of all times, okay? Beyond the Linux Foundation and so forth. And Zephyr is now the 25th most active open source project out there, which for an embedded project, I'm pretty proud of, I have to admit. I don't think any other one up there is embedded like we are. So, it is very small. You can basically configure it to be about 8K flash, 5K RAM. You can't do much more than a Blinky at that point, but nonetheless. And then you just incrementally add what you need to it, and you can go from sensors all the way up to complex multi-core systems. It's being used very extensively in firmware. If you've got a laptop with Intel in it right now, you probably have Zephyr running on the firmware. All the Chromebooks are running Zephyr on the firmware. And then a wide variety of other things are there. It's very flexible. There's over 750 boards in our repo now, and there's over 250 sensors. So there's a pretty good chance that whatever you're working with off the shelf, it's already sort of implemented in Zephyr. And then we've been trying to make sure we can do the best security best practices. We became a CV numbering authority, and with our own PCERT team from our community volunteers back in 2018. And so we've been managing vulnerabilities and applying security best practices, including things like SBOM generation. To generate an SBOM with Zephyr, using its build system, it's like 3 commit commands before you do your build, and then you get a very detailed thing. So whenever we learn about a best practice on security, we've been applying it here. And this has been paying off for us. This is why people are adopting it, I think. Obviously, though, in this space, in particular for the sustainability, the fine-grained power management is definitely having an impact as well. There's a lot of controls to work with, and a lot of the applications I'll show you in a minute are you leveraging this for things like 10 years in the field battery life, okay? And we have a pretty wide ecosystem. Most of the major silicon vendors are now supporting us if they're not members. And we actually do a lot of collaborating with people making commercial products to build a virtuous circle and to help make sure we move things forward. Some of the products I'll show you are from our members. So let's start off with reference examples. Goliath, who is one of our members, puts out open reference examples that people can look at to implement things like soil moisture monitoring and greenhouse monitoring. So there's open reference examples out there, which, as you can see, have a pretty obvious connection to minimizing hunger and being efficient with resources. And so there's open reference solutions there that you can take and build from, and they make everything open. On the commercial side, Gardena has a smart irrigation controller that basically, I don't know, who here is familiar with Gardena? Okay, the ones in Europe will be familiar with it. We haven't quite penetrated into the North American equivalents yet, but the irrigation is using Zephyr. It's basically on the Bluetooth connection and the connectivity, and so they make that available. And so working on an irrigation system. And then the other thing that the gateway we found out about 3 years ago. We just found this one out at FOSDEM, okay? They brought one into our booth and were showing us it. But it's basically a solar-powered irrigation solution that hooks in and then generates for watering an area of about 320 square meters. And so these are places where it's using the solar power, it's using the information and a bit of smarts to figure out how to make things more efficient. And then when you get to commercial, there's, for the farmers, there's the 7sense irrigation sensors. We know that one's using Zephyr too. And they can add it to reference systems and reduces the water loss. So it's more about using the water efficiently as well as being responsible in the environment. This one, the Telespore Radio Bella, is being used as a sheep collar. Okay, so it's tracking sheep in the field. It does have a battery on it, so it can change the battery if necessary. And they've got over 100,000 devices deployed in the field. So Ernas is one of our members, and they've been working with a commercial company to make that available, and they said we could take it. So if you ever see us at a show, you'll see a little fuzzy Shaun the Sheep with one of those on, because we've got a couple of those they gave us to let things be visible. But as you can see, that's helping to track life on land and making sure everything's being the hunger. And this is one of the first ones I learned about, actually. And it's an ear tag for tracking reindeer up in Norway and Scandinavia. And so the Anicare. And so these are available for about $99. And they basically just go into the reindeer's ears, and I was going like, well, why would they do this? How could they do this? Well, in those countries, if a wolf or natural predator takes down a reindeer, and they can prove it and document it, they get insurance money from the government for the losses of the herd. And so by knowing where their animals are, no predator is going to be eating that piece of plastic. And so you can sort of get the evidence, you document it, and you can be reimbursed. And so this helps a little bit more of a natural ecosystem actually emerge without trying to go after the wolf population or things like that, because it's all part of a natural predatorial cycle. But by knowing where they are and being a little bit more mindful of it, we can have a much more healthy dynamic, and the herders who depend on this for their livelihoods are finding it useful. Now, this is the latest one I just learned about last week, okay? And what's kind of cool about this one, in particular, this little one here, it's an ear tag. It's 1 ounce, okay, 30 grams. It's got a solar cell on it, and it goes onto the cow's ears. This is coming out of Australia, okay? And they're bringing it over here to North America. But it goes in the cow's ears, and what it does is it communicates directly to satellites. So you don't have to have in-field information, and it's also doing things like, with AI algorithms on the monitoring side, doing pasture management. So seeing where the cows are, how grazed over the pasture, how grazed is the pasture, and basically doing some of the metrics. And when they get paired with the taro, you get even more information. So you could have either the taro on them, or you could have the ceres on them, or you can put the two of them together to get a much more detailed picture of your herd as it's living on the land and free-ranging. So as you can sort of see, this is contributing into being more sustainable, especially with the fact that it's doing the pasture management and using AI algorithms to really help understand what's going on. Obviously, we all have lived through COVID, and we all know the importance of keeping things cold in transit. And so there was a nice open reference solution from Goliath here on tracking assets, as well as monitoring the air quality. And so these obviously are contributing to health and well-being. And then Oticon is one of our members of the project. And for about 5 or 6 years now, all their hearing aids have Zephyr in them. So this is a commercial hearing aid. It's got some of the best anti-tinnitus work out there right now. It's known for that. And it's using Zephyr with Bluetooth and pairing into your phone and making things much more accessible. So again, helping well-being. This one here from WearTech, the Mahi, is a little sensor with a bunch of, it's a little device with a bunch of sensors to pick up on fall detection and for seniors and for health at home and so forth. So these little devices are being used to help improve quality of life. And then near and dear to the hearts here in this community, the Healthy Pie is sitting here, and it's helping to monitor the biometrics. So we can sort of see, and we know this is running Zephyr. And I would encourage you to go talk to the Proto-Central guys on their booth and learn more about it after this talk. But doing these biometrics, I like to do the hacking on the biometric side myself. So I'm quite excited to play with this one now myself. Oops, sorry. And then this was the very first one I learned about, okay? This was the first project I learned about, and we learned about it in Embedded World about 2 years after we launched the project. And what it is this barcode scanner. Very simple, but rather than the gun and getting the repetitive stress for scanning the barcodes and so forth, it's mounted on your hand, and you've got a much more natural motion in order to trigger and do the reads. And so the device on your hand and then the receiver are using signaling Bluetooth, and both are running Zephyr. So they showed up at our booth, and they told us the thing, and it was like, oh, this is so cool. And then we go, well, you need to upstream it, And they're going like, oh, no, we're a startup, we can't do that, blah, 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 blah. I'm going, okay. A year later, they were back in our booth, and they'd started upstreaming because someone else had put something in that's going to make them do more work to keep up their stuff. And so the upstream, and being the common denominator, became the motivator for them to upstream it so they could just follow through without less effort over time. And that's why open source tends to work, because you sort of scratch and do what you need, and then you build from there. Here's another one that's monitoring water leaks. Okay, it's non-invasive, it goes around a pipe, and it's detecting if there's a leak happening in your home environment. Okay, and that's running Zephyr. And then this one for commercial is, again, doing the same factor for like a whole building and connecting and making sure and seeing what's going on in the building to, again, make sure you're not losing water. Now, Vestas is, their wind turbines are running Zephyr. And so this is a really easy direct to the sustainability goals for people to understand. But the fact that they're doing open source and they're using and leveraging it, they're getting a lot of the updates, and they're being able to help with these challenges. The other one we found is the EV charger. So this can be mounted anywhere, and basically it's also basically running Zephyr and is helping support the clean energy for electric cars and so forth. For those who are familiar, anyone familiar with Libre Solar? Oh, I've got a couple hands. Anyhow, this one's running Zephyr as well, and it's for basically converting between the solar panels to your inverter, your home systems and so forth, and for the DC energy. And everything is open source there, and it is using Zephyr. And I learned about this from the LF Energy side, actually. They were at a conference, and they put my talk on Zephyr and this one at the same time, and it's sort of like, that's the one that was using Zephyr. And so I was talking with the people behind it, and they're really nice. Goliath has also put some reference examples out there too, if you want to play with theirs, for AC power monitoring and DC power monitoring. So we can basically apply things and then do the monitoring at scale. Similarly, Blixt has a solid-state circuit breaker, and basically will also let you do real-time voltage monitoring with it. So you can be more efficient with your power and also be more precise about shutting things down if you start to see anomalies. And then this one here is the one that it's a device that basically goes onto your high towers for monitoring the resistance in the lines. And once you have to use a cherry picker to install it on your power electric system, and then it monitors the lines. And so you don't want to be changing the battery on that one that often. So it's got like a 10-year battery life. And that's what lets you monitor it to see if there's been a degradation from too many lightning strikes or other issues. And that's out there. Similar note, here's a little tracker that's got a solar cell on it. And so you can be tracking assets through your supply chain, and it's being powered through the solar. So if it's outdoors, something like that, this is a potential solution that can let you basically keep things understood where they are and the positioning of them in various spots on a farm or wherever. And then this was one I came across at CES this year. When I was talking, walking around the innovation centers and so forth, the WePower folks are doing this. And that button press is running Zephyr. And every time you press the button, you're generating current, you're collecting the current, and when there's enough, it's basically sending status. So you're using energy harvesting from motions to basically generate your current, and so you're not putting things in battery. I don't have a good picture of it, but the other one that they had in their booth that was running Zephyr was a device that would sit on a motor, like a big engine turbine type of deal, and the vibrations were powering that. So you could be checking the behavior of the motor over time without additional wires or characteristics. So the fact that you can do these sorts of creative things and not have to use batteries and wires enables a lot of things that were not possible before. How many of you guys have been on one of the trains in Germany, the Deutsche Bahn? Okay. When you're doing a long train ride, you want your bathrooms to work, correct? Okay. This coupler, it actually connects from the hose, it pumps out the sewage tanks and connects to the train. So it's a coupler that goes through, and it monitors with AI the considerations of what's flowing through and making sure the tank gets properly emptied so that things stay working, okay? And it's running Zephyr, as you can tell. But the combination of AI and low power is enabling a lot of opportunities. Like, with this in the trains, with the cow ear tags and pasture monitoring, you're going to be seeing more of that stuff, I think, in the years to come. In fact, here's another one where there's some AI going on. How many of you have been to like a concert or something like that and they've got all the trash cans? Figuring out if they're starting to get too full is important. Similarly, if you've got some scattered remotely in a park or something, if they're not being used, you don't want to spend time going and picking them up and dumping them if they're empty. So this device here will sit in the top of these trash cans and monitor whether they're full or not. So it's looking and seeing, okay, when does the level get full enough, and then sends a signal saying, come pick me up and empty me. So these are little ways that we can make things a little bit better. Similarly, there's another tracker from Sensing that can monitor things, and it's just like, 40 millimeters by 40 millimeters. So it's really tiny, and they can be put onto things and just be tracking them. And in a similar notion, they've actually hooked them into smart buoys to go onto fishing nets. So you're not driving your boat around to try to find your fishing net or losing your fishing net into the ocean and trapping fish as it's flying around. So you can be much more precise about your fishing nets. And so this communication technology to help find things is paying off in helping with the sustainability. similar notion, the Ernos folk have been working with smart parks on collars for the elephants in the wild, and tracking them. And what I thought was really cool is they actually have implantables for rhino horns. Okay? So these things have to last on with their batteries for 2 years in the field. Okay? And as they've been, and I was going like, well, how do you change the battery? And they say, well, the horn is growing. In 2 years, they'll have grown out. And then they'll just put a new one in. But they've actually managed to catch and prosecute a poacher with some of this stuff, which helps with keeping sustainability and biodiversity in our problem. And then on the more back at home, how many people have had a dog escape their house and then go walking around the neighborhood? Yeah, okay, a few of us. And potentially having a cat that you haven't been able to find. This is a little tracker for your pets. And it works to basically be able to find your dog or cat in the local area and see what's happening and check their habits. So this is out there too to help make things a little bit better. So hopefully I've been able to show you that this is being now a foundation for a lot of the innovation that's happening. We've got over 750 boards, several of which are obviously in crowd supplies. Portfolio are already upstream. And we have 250 sensors, so there's a lot of space for innovation to build from. And we have most of the main supported architectures out there, and we've just added Renaissance RX. That's the newest port that's just come in. The stack is fairly complete. Everything is there. You don't have to get other libraries and try to integrate them. You just have to configure them and turn them on. So it's very easy to go and prototype things rapidly and get it working with one chip. And you've got supply chain trouble or something like that, you can potentially move over to another chip fairly straightforward with your application. And that's part of the reason it's being adopted, is it's very easy to move and work around supply chain issues. We've got a pretty vibrant ecosystem at this point. There's a lot of developer tools, hopefully your favorites there. We just finished adding a commercial compiler this year. IAR is finally up there with us. Which gives us a way of having a safety certified compiler so we can go after our safety certification without having to deal with GCC and certifications and so forth, or LLVM. We've got a wide range of debugger tools like the Sager and Lauterbach and so forth, and Percepio. And we've got a fair number of simulators working with Zephyr already too. In fact, if you go to Renode, they've got a Zephyr dashboard where they've taken 13 apps, including 3 or 4 ML apps, and they've basically tested their simulator by compiling everything in our repo. And in that dashboard, so if you look Zephyr dashboard, Renode, you'll probably come up with Google, no problem. But if you look at that and you mouse over, you'll see that there's actually 3 SBOMs for every built image. One for the sources of Zephyr, one for the sources of the app, and then a build SBOM that says exactly which sources are actually in that built, the .a's, these go to your .a's, and which .a's go to your ELF image. And so you can be very precise about whether or not a vulnerability may affect you or not. So you get rid of a whole class of false positives by having this level of information. So you say, oh, there's this bug in Zephyr. Well, if the bug in Zephyr is in a file that's not in your image, you can say it, and you don't have to update. Which when you're in the field, and it's very expensive to remotely update these IoT devices, if you can at all. That's important to know. We're getting more and more people being willing to train on Zephyr. And so if you're trying to learn more, there's Nordic has a bunch of free training, so does Goliath. Beningo does a fair amount of work now. And Doulas and AC6 are formal training organizations. So we've actually got, this was a big problem for us about 2 years ago. We didn't have enough training, and people were interested in how to figure it out. And then there's a variety of people that'll do services and consulting. We've got to remember some of the key security microfirmware. And then we have TensorFlow Lite, Edge Impulse, and MLert working on the AI side, the ML AI side. And then we've got work going on with various language runtimes, including CircuitPython. The Adafruit guys were initially a member, and they've decided they're just going to use Zephyr as an underpinning now for CircuitPython. That was talked about in January. And so they're good allies. MicroPython's there, but we're doing a lot of work right now with Rust in the user space. as well as JavaScript, C++, and Lua. And there's a variety of other scientific libraries and sound open firmware and things like that. And I probably don't know all of them yet. You know, trying to find these things and figure out what's getting integrated is a good challenge. We do have a lot of remote management because these IoT devices get deployed in fleets. You know, all those sheep have to be tracked somehow. And so we've got various companies that are focusing on that, as well as we've just added a lot more graphical interfaces are now starting to show up. MicroEdge and Qt Group basically joined us as members when they started playing around with us and realized how easy it was to have coverage across a whole range of silicon suites without additional porting. So they got quite enthused. And then joined them, we've got LVGL and Slint, and then Ross. And so, as you can see, the sustainable solution creation support, we're supporting this in these areas at least. And there's more that I'm not showing here. Okay, if you go onto our website, you'll see a lot of projects and products we've learned, like for instance, scooters, the VO scooters in Europe, they're running Zephyr. And so the challenge for me is figuring out which products are there. So if you have a product that's using Zephyr or you know of one, just let us know. There's a free form. See that? If you just go to our website, you'll bring up a form and feel free to register and we'll help promote your product or whoever's doing that because it helps a project. Even if you're not a member, knowing that you have a product with Zephyr is that. It's also, if you let us know and you want to be notified, we will actually, if you've got a product with Zephyr for free, we will basically push security vulnerabilities to you, okay? So that we can, so this is again, best practices for security. We'll let you know these things under embargo so you can fix it with your customers before things become public. Because like I say, this is again, following the best practices. And the other thing here is in crowd supply, if you're using Zephyr, please tag it with Zephyr so that we can find it, because this helps us as well. So with that, I think it's important to keep in mind, you know, you don't have to do things that are grand and heroic, just small acts with everyone doing a little bit will make a difference. So thank you. Oh, question, okay. What's your question?
Hi, thank you so much. So Zephyr is a very big project, right? And it has, you know, a lot of corporate sponsors and a lot of different organizations working together. And, you know, organizations will push for sustainability together in a lot of instances. But does Zephyr have a strategy for remaining durable when a constituent member might not be pushing for sustainability?
Yeah, we've got an architecture board. And the architecture board will assess any significant changes to the APIs and the subsystems to make sure that we're staying aligned up with the architecture. And if there's two constituents or something that's really controversial, it might go to a vote at the TSC. Our TSC is set up so that every 2 years our chair is elected, so he has peer support effectively. So we do not have dictators for life in this project, and so you can, by participating actively in the community, you can become a TSC member and then you can vote on that. And so it's the developer pool is what determines what goes in the code repo. Oops, okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
I had a question about device driver sharing between Linux and Zephyr. You've got the potential for rewriting everything twice or sharing.
Yeah.
Is there any work being done to remove the overlap?
The challenge is the licensing here. The Linux kernel is under GPL licensing and Zephyr is under Apache licensing. On the other hand, this doesn't stop people from reading and understanding and just recoding it. But if you are the original contributor of a device driver, you can, if you have the copyright, you can contribute it into both places. Okay, but it's going to take the people who are being the contributors to do that type of thing.
What about a framework that makes that easier?
Again, for frameworks, it'll be a shim layer type of arrangement, so it's going to be a little bit awkward. And if there's, if people want to try to work on that, then working with the architecture group and working with the TSC to see that it's acceptable to the rest of it. We just have to be very careful. Like, for instance, kconfig is being used, right, with CMake for building Zephyr. And so there is some GPL there, but it's not making it into the final images so that we have and we're very precise about our Apache license and maintaining that, because that gives you your patent grant. And so you don't want someone coming after you from a patent real perspective after you've gotten a successful product out there. So that was the reason it was chosen for that one. Okay? Sure. You got it? Thanks. Okay, who gets it?
I saw a number of interesting products up there. I'm wondering how many of those products chose Zephyr because they were using Nordic parts versus choosing Zephyr first and then deciding on the micros.
The first ones we've learned about were Nordic because of the Bluetooth, and the Q did support in Bluetooth. And so Nordic was the first company to basically get behind Zephyr and put it into their default SDK. Others are now moving there, like Renaissance is just in the process of switching over. And people tend to build things on the SDK, so a lot of the earlier products, you saw Word based off of Nordic. A lot of the recent ones, though, are coming off of NXP and Silicon Labs, Infineon, and so forth. So we're seeing it shift into a wider spectrum. And, you know, as I learn more, I will happily put them up, but I'm very grateful to Nordic for being visible about their products and making sure that they get mentioned at Zephyr, because it does, once people started seeing products there, it became a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy for us. And it says once people see products here, they tend to go and, oh, I can do that. Yeah, okay, fine. And so that's kind of how it goes for us. Oops. Thanks.
I'm really interested in the partnership with CircuitPython. Is it still an Adafruit project?
Yeah, it's Adafruit. Adafruit actually was a member of Zephyr at one point in time when we really needed membership to keep the lights on, okay? And then when we started getting more successful and popular, they said, okay, well, you don't need us as much anymore. But we've always had a really good relationship with them. And they had a familiarity with Zephyr because of that. And they were basically following the CircuitPython strategy. But then I think if you look at their blog post, in January, they decided that basically it didn't make sense to keep porting. They just leveraged what was Zephyr doing and put things on top.
Okay.
And so I was delighted to see that.
Zephyr is kind of like the HAL for
CircuitPython, yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, we think it is anyhow. There's a lot of cool stuff out there. Oops, we've got one over. Oh, is there another one? Okay.
I think we got a line up here. Yeah.
Okay.
Talking about GUI interfaces, it's often been a challenge to make really rich, dynamic GUI in embedded systems. I saw 4 listed there. One of them was Qt, which isn't necessarily open source.
No.
But if you were to sort of rate the maturity of those frameworks, with the 4 that you listed there, how would you rate those? And how closely are they working with?
Benjamin may disagree with me, and he's the one who really studies this and is really much into this. But LVGL was our first one that we had there, so I suspect it's the most mature. And then Slint, and then the 2 new ones have just really started coming on board this year. So I think you'll see them becoming very mature if they're not already there. But that's kind of the order I'd look at them from, just from a historical and who's been banging on it the longest.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Okay. Oh, right, it's a bro.
Great talk. Really love this. Oh, thanks, Josh. So, of all the sustainable development goals, which areas do you feel are the most underserved right now?
Oh, wow. Good question. I think poverty is probably underserved, and removing some of the diversity issues and so forth. One of the products I don't have up there that I know is using Zephyr is the Gate Q, and if you look on our website, you'll find it, which goes if you've got Parkinson's. It helps with stabilizing people with the impulses and signals so that they can be communicating and walking. You know, I think those sorts of things to help with the assist. When I was at CES, one of the companies there specializes in effectively a plate that goes on the top of your mouth that communicates to a wheelchair so that quadriplegics can navigate with a wheelchair. And that's using Zephyr on the wheelchair, and the next rev of it, the top plate was going to be using Zephyr. So you're using your tongue as a joystick to navigate yourself with your wheelchair. And so some of these types of applications are starting to emerge. The other thing that was there at CES, it was one of the award winners. It took a while of talking to the person. They didn't want to admit they were using Zephyr initially because it was their secret sauce. But it was an artificial bionic leg. And the person was, an amputee, and so he was using this leg and walking around. And it was, much more natural motion. The other one that I've seen is, again, for using a band with a prosthetic limb to control the limb with muscle impulses. And they're using Zephyr for that. That's up at a startup in Boston. So we're sort of seeing this type of medical side coming in, which will help with making things a little bit more equal, making people things more accessible. The fact that you've got things that are lower bandwidth and power might end up helping some of the poverty and the tracking situations, but I'm not sure on that one. That's one I think is underserved still. Okay, go for it. Oops, I think there's one behind.
Thanks so much. And I really like the sustainability aspect of it. And I heard you mention the idea of looking at SBOMs of where everything is coming from.
Yeah.
And so that kind of brought to mind the question of sustainable development. And so I was thinking, about like last year, there are a whole bunch of these projects that have basically single maintainers that all of these larger projects like Zephyr are based on, right? And like if you think about XZ utils and stuff like that.
They're things that are used in our user space more than inside. Well, XZ utils, yeah, it's one of the libraries that people can build off of, yeah.
Right.
That's true.
And so I'm kind of wondering, like, what are the steps that are taken to make sustainable development more sustainable for all of the, for the
things?
little contributors also?
Yeah, I think it's a question of making it so we're making it a spot for people to work from, but we don't have any we don't have any funding ourselves, okay? So it's the people contributing who are making products. We hope that they join us as a member to help to fund the infrastructure, and I'm hoping that we get structures set up I think there's a few other organizations out there that will basically support maintainers and Patreon and so forth. So there are some aspects out there for funding that, but building up communities is something that the LF tries to help with. We've got a lot of unfunded projects in the LF already, one of which I've been involved with since even before I joined the LF, is called System Package Data Exchange, and it has open source tools with one or two maintainers in them, but that's for generating on SBOMs and consuming SBOMs and things like that. So we do a lot of work with these unfunded projects like the open printing and so forth, and help them set up governance and structures for raising funds when they want to do it. So it's more of a matter of that type of thing. We also do a lot of work with the OpenSSF, which actually does have grants and ability to give money out too. And so Zephyr is trying to be a good citizen on the security side, using best practices and helping other people that way too, to show them how to do it.
That's awesome. Thanks so much.
Oops, there's one more here. Thanks.
Hi, I'm sorry, this is probably another, hey, can you fix everything in open source question?
No worries.
But I had to look this up, so if I'm wrong, Apache does not require a source available? Is that
No,
okay?
Apache does not require source available.
which is
That's why it's hard for me to find them. On the other hand, there's so much GPL stuff out there, like Tesla cars running Linux, that the source really isn't available.
Exactly.
So
Okay.
at least this we've got patent grant.
Yeah, so my question was really related more towards the medical devices, because that's the big one
Yep.
of medical devices, not supported and it's attached to somebody's body.
Correct. The implantables.
So do you have, do you guys, do anything to try and encourage that or try to...
Word of mouth, I've seen a variety of things starting to show up and people experimenting in this. Whether they're ready to take it to the FDA or not is a good question. What we're trying to do with Zephyr is make sure our quality is very high, and that part of the thing we're doing is, quite frankly, going after traceability between requirements, code, and test, so we can have full traceability and do actual formal V modeling. And that's what we're doing for 61508. And once we have 61508, using the medical, software of unknown provenance soup stuff, should be fairly straightforward for the assessors. ODCON is already going through medical for the hearing aids because it does have that aspect. And so others have been doing it We just don't have the public evidence to reuse. And we're trying to do this type of exercise right now in the public with the requirements traceability so we can have the higher quality. So it's a direction that's part of the best practices we're trying to follow. And watch this space. Maybe next year we'll be a lot closer. We've actually gotten our concept approval from Tube Sud. We've got our phase 1 concept approval. We got that last December for the plan we're doing. They think if we do what we say we're going to do, they can certify us. And certainly, if we do the Farmer V model and have that full traceability, we should be able to go after 26.2 as well. We've got a couple of our members that are automotive, Honda and Cariad. And so they're basically working with us to make sure that we can go after the automotive. And so some of the sensors into the cars may eventually be using Zephyr.
I know most of those words. Thank you.
Sure. Oops. Oh. Okay. Last guy. Okay. Okay.
Can you describe if Zephyr has like a reproducible build process, or if like Geek support, like building with Geeks, or just?
I'm not familiar with Geek support,
Okay.
but we do have fully reproducibles. We have reproducible builds effectively. I do a lot of work with the Octo community also that does reproducible builds, and some of the Debian side, and so I'm familiar with some of the constraints. I don't know how much we're doing with the date side of it, but realistically, once you've built it, you should be able to rebuild it, and that's an area that we're focusing on for the CRA, because we're going to need the reproducibility for being able to rebuild things 10 years from now, 20 years from now. So very much focused. Thanks. Okay.
Thank you, Kate. Thanks, everyone, for the great questions.